the highest bidder from a pool of applicants to be the expert or something, or
Yeah.
however they choose that sort of thing. Like, of course they consult experts, but like, how are they picking them?
Taking your time is really important, especially with big decisions, to not make rash judgments and push something through without really thinking about it. Patriot Act, right? If it's something small, probably doesn't matter that much.
That's what she said.
Legislators don't tend to follow their constituents' wishes at all. They tend to follow their own and corporate and government interests above what the people would want. And that in itself is a big problem. Oh, wait a minute. I've never worked in politics, so therefore I can't talk about it. Okay, well, welcome everybody to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we'd love it if you'd like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You want to be one of those cool people, right? Part of the KSM club. Club spelled with a K, I guess. Like to be
Yes.
to be.
And if you would look,
Uh-oh, you have a little bit of jittery internet there, I think, for a second.
oh, really?
Yeah, but it's
Is this thing on?
it's good now, I think.
All right. Well, I'm Casey Rochford. You should stick around to the end because there's music not made by this monkey. So, what shall we discuss tonight?
Yeah,
tomorrow.
Well, I guess this is kind of a broad topic, but this is something that we've run into a few times, and I know I hear people say things akin to this all the time. Like, hey, you're not a parent, you don't have kids, so you can't your comments about parenting are meaningless, whatever. Or one of our episodes, the one about abortion, we got comments that said, oh, you're not women, so you have no right basically to talk about abortion unless you have a woman guest on or something. And I think this would be an interesting thing to discuss, because to me, I think, well, you don't have to necessarily be part of a particular group to have thoughts on things. And I mean, there is a little thing called empathy where you can put yourself in another person's shoes, you can listen to their stories, and then have your own views on the particular subject. And
well, there's also this thing called perspective, and keeping yourself open to fresh perspectives isn't a bad thing. Like, you don't have to listen or like take heed to whatever words come out of a person's mouth. Like, there's no reason to tell them to shut up over this, and this is called the identity fallacy. Like, they even have a logical fallacy for this, because just because you haven't done something doesn't mean you can't have an opinion about it, or wouldn't even have like something meaningful to add to the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Often it's quite the contrary. Like, analogical thinking is buttressed by a broad variety of experience. And yeah, experts are really great for knowing a lot about one thing, but if there's any other like schools of thought that play into this, it really helps to have somebody with a more broad, a renaissance kind of
a polymath sort of thinking, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not being an expert in any one particular subject, but having a lot of experience in many categories, basically. Well, and I think there's a lot of things. I mean, for instance, the abortion thing, or the kids thing, or whatever. A lot of these, it's they're more philosophical questions and or concepts. And I think, yeah, you can. There's a lot of similarities from one particular thing to another. So you may not necessarily have kids, right? But you can still, well, you were a kid at one point in time, and you probably know people with kids and have observed things and may have your own perspective on that that might align with or diverge from other people's perspectives. And even within those groups, obviously, their views differ. Everybody
Yeah.
has a different idea about what to do to parent, and a lot of
Right.
people have different views about, say, abortion or the rights of women to control their bodies and things. And women disagree on that. So
Yeah. And I understand the frustration, especially when it comes to something like abortion. Um, people say like there's you have no right to create law unless you have a uterus, when it comes to that. And it's like I get the sentiment there. I really can understand like the frustration there.
mhm.
But we have a system with which we create laws, and we can't just pick and choose which ones we handle differently.
Well,
For
yeah,
one
because
thing,
you can
like
see the slippery slope there,
right.
where all of a sudden everybody would be saying, no, no, you can't do that because you're not part of this group. Like,
Well,
oh, you
we
can't
can't let
make
the
laws.
citizens vote on that because they just don't know, like
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
exactly. Well, or for like legislators, for instance, that means we have to have a legislator that represents every potential conceivable category that could ever exist. And
yeah,
that, how messy would that be?
right. But that doesn't mean to say like we shouldn't have a kind of a remedy for
Mm-hmm.
some missing pieces in that puzzle. So like maybe when it comes to uh hot button topics like that, there really should be some kind of town hall esque contribution that people can make, like um experts weighing in on it
Sure.
and things
Oh,
like
I
that, like
I agree. Yeah.
like, and in fact all legislation really should have like a third party selected uh experts, not like the government choosing like the highest bidder from a pool of applicants to be the expert or something, or
Yeah.
however they choose that sort of thing. Like, of course they consult experts, but like how are they picking them, like
Well, that's a good question. Well, and experts are only half of it. I mean, what about consulting those who this piece of legislation will affect?
right.
Like, that's more important as far as I'm concerned. Like, hey, this is going
Mm-hmm.
to affect us in this way. Here's our opinions. Listen to all of these different angles before actually going forward with this, because it may have implications you haven't considered.
Yeah.
And
I
I think that would be very good. Maybe more
Yeah.
time consuming, but that is one thing. Like, time, taking your time is really important, especially with big decisions, to not make rash judgments and push something through without really thinking about it.
Mhm.
Patriot Act. Um, like,
Right.
we should be cautious whenever something is big, right? If it's something small, probably doesn't matter that much.
That's what she said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, certainly, I think that would be extremely beneficial. Maybe that's the way it ought to be. And then the question
Yeah.
comes, like, well, do we even need legislators at all at that point? Maybe we need something more akin to like judges that hear all sides and hear all opinions and views as much as they can, and then try to make the best decision based on that information.
That gets really complicated, I feel like
Well, I mean, wouldn't it result in a better outcome potentially?
I don't know, not necessarily, because like you've got a judge making the final ruling on that, and then that becomes legal precedent, and other
Well,
judges just go, well, this judge said that, so I'm going to
I
say
don't
that
I
too.
don't necessarily mean it like necessarily that it would play out the same way that it does in courts, but have the same kind of operation to some extent. Maybe a panel of judges, right? Supreme Court type of stuff,
Yeah.
where it's not just one person's decision. Like it requires kind of consensus of like a majority consensus.
Mm-hmm.
That way you can't get like one person in there who's like, ah, yeah, you know, they have radical views and they make a decision that nobody wants or something. It can be balanced out by other minds, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, the legislation angle of the whole thing makes it a little bit more hairy, I think, than I don't know, like looking at the broader view. Maybe the whole angle to take is to change minds, um, instead of trickling down with fixing this logical fallacy, try to teach the masses how to think better.
Mm-hmm.
And because when you do that, like, you might better and electing better legislators and itself, if you just know how to, like, not be a dumbass, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. And although there are problems kind of with the system in general as it stands, legislators don't tend to follow their constituents' wishes at all. They tend to
Right.
follow their own and corporate and government interests above what the people would want. Um, and that in itself is a big problem. Oh, wait a minute. I've never worked in politics, so therefore I can't talk about it. Going back to the
Right.
kind of the beginning of this. Uh, but that is a huge problem. And I don't think no amount of educating the public and increasing their awareness of things really will change that. Um, it's well, maybe it will, possibly. I guess it just
Yeah.
depends. But the people who run for office are not necessarily altruistic people. That system attracts a certain kind of person, and well, there you go. Generally corrupt people.
Yeah. But I mean, laws aside, something a little bit more, um, or I should say less heated is, your other example of not being able to contribute an opinion to parenting issues if you're not yourself a parent. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, nobody is a parent when they have their first child. Should
Yeah.
they have their child taken away until they go to parent classes or something?
Yeah.
Like what? How communist China do you want to get? Like,
Yeah. Well, and
like,
that's it's kind
I
of
mean,
like
everybody has to make mistakes. Everybody thinks about, well, if I had a kid, how would I handle this? Or maybe they
mhm,
don't, but, like, that's going to vary from person to person, no matter what.
sure. And amongst parents, their views are all over the map.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has the right way, the one way. And when you're a parent, you suddenly know everything. No, like, and as an outsider, if you're somebody who isn't a parent, but you're observing others, you might be like able to recognize patterns and say, oh, hey, this particular parenting style, my friends, this is the way they do things, and their kids turned out pretty all right. Or this is the way this other group raised kids, and they turned out completely crazy, like all
Right.
kinds of issues. And you could still be able to observe that and comment on it, I think, and provide advice to people. So if somebody's doing something a way that you have seen in the past to not work, and have another alternative that seems to work, well, I think conveying that to somebody, it shouldn't be some kind of heresy.
Right.
It's like,
I understand that, parents are protective, right? They're trying to avoid harming their children in some way or another. but overprotection is harmful too.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes more harmful.
Like helicopter parenting and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a
And
movement now for like dangerous playgrounds and things like that.
yeah.
Kind of like
And
free
when it
range
comes,
kids.
especially when it comes to things about harm reduction, I think parents should actually be open to listening to other opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe from other parents, maybe from people who aren't parents, but
Yeah.
just in general, I think they really should uh open their minds a little bit, because like there is that tendency to overprotect,
Sure.
and that actually can be super harmful.
Well, definitely. And one thing too, I think that maybe the one of the sources of this kind of backlash, I guess, is that people tend to take advice as if it's some kind of criticism, right? And
Yeah.
people are not very good at hearing criticism when it's like, okay, that's super important. Like when a bunch of people are saying this isn't right, or maybe you should do it this way, maybe they're onto something, and that's not something you should take personally.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I mean, it's like an ego thing essentially. Like, oh, I can't listen to, I can't be wrong. Nobody wants to
Right.
be wrong, but it's like, well, what we talk about in the past about science and stuff. It's like, well, that's actually the normal way of doing things. It's like it's okay to be wrong. In fact, sometimes
Right.
being wrong is exciting. So,
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a nice feeling to learn something.
mhm.
And oftentimes learning something means reprogramming something that you previously thought was true.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
Very
tough one
often
to
that's the
overcome.
case.
Oh yeah, well, and that's something that I think maybe should be more common in society in general. That like that's what we attempt to do is improve constantly and correct faults and accept mistakes as being okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I feel like societies in general view it the other way around. Like making mistakes is bad, but making mistakes is how you learn. Like you wouldn't learn if you don't make mistakes. I mean, truly learn, right?
Yeah.
And we wouldn't, as a society overall, improve if we didn't make mistakes. If we just thought we knew it all, or if everything always went right, well, there's a lot of mysteries we would never know the answer to. We wouldn't even know that those mysteries exist in the first place.
And regarding parenting, I think being transparent about, with your child or children, about your own mistakes, and owning up to them, and speaking about how you've learned from that and how you want to change, goes a long way to creating that in your child. Because a lot of what you see in this identity fallacy, where people are like, I'm the parent, I'm always right, is
Mm-hmm.
that the kid thinks, oh, I'm always right too, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And that creates more problems. It spreads the wildfire.
sure, sure. And I think it kind of creates an environment where there's no room for modification or error or anything like that. Where like, okay, the parent always has the say, always is right. There's no counter arguments that could be made. I mean, granted, little tiny kids, that might be a little. You do kind of have to be like, hey, because like if you let your tiny ignorant kid go and do whatever they want and eat anything they want, like okay, well that could be bad. Um,
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised. Little kids can make a lot of sense
mhm.
sometimes,
Oh yeah,
you know.
oh yeah. I don't think people give children credit for being intelligent. Um,
And
like
so
they
and
may not be
sometimes,
wise, but they can still be very intelligent.
yeah, and sometimes it's easier to see the answer to a solution if you have less knowledge. in
Uh-huh.
general.
Yeah, the
Like
power
if
of
your brain isn't cluttered with all this other crap, oftentimes it's so much easier and faster to figure out a solution to a
it's
problem.
the power of being dumb. Yeah. In fact, what didn't Red Dwarf have a joke about that in there? Like Rimmer, like his superpower was that he was just dumb. And so he could see answers that no one else could see because like, you know what I mean? And maybe
He
there's something
got
to
that.
yeah. There might be something to that when yeah, your brain, you're so clouded by so much information that it's really hard to see a simple solution.
Mhm.
I run into that all the time building things. Like I have to keep catching myself like in engineering and building things that you want to get the most simple and elegant solution possible. And sure, it's very easy to get caught up in building and making things and over engineer things.
Yeah.
And that's not the right way. It should be the simplest possible solution.
How
And
many times when we owned a business did we simply have to turn the machine on?
yeah,
Like that.
yep, you overlook the obvious.
Yeah. Happens like that even happens to us,
Yep,
like
like or it's
there have
not
been
even
plenty of times where I'm like, oh, I didn't turn it
where
on.
it's like not even plugged in or something.
Right.
I've seen that plenty of times.
Yeah.
Like that happens all the time where I work, fixing computer stuff and electronic things that like sometimes you spend like an hour trying to troubleshoot something and then find out, oh wait, it's not even connected. Oh, we'll just boop, plug it in and oh,
Yeah.
we're back in business.
Well, and speaking of the business, you remember early on we had the plate assembly issue that took,
Mm-hmm.
you figured out a way to fix it, but it
Mm-hmm.
took 4 hours to do it.
Yep. Yeah.
And two of us, like
Mm-hmm.
it was a two-person job, 4 hours. And eventually you did some research and found a way one person could do it in 10 minutes
Yep.
with an even cheaper part.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Just a screwdriver, basically.
Yeah.
That was all it was. Oh yeah, you didn't have to replace the entire assembly too. You could replace the one gear out
One
of
gear.
the
Yeah.
out of the assembly. So it was a really cheap and fast fix. And
Or the BMW special tool,
yeah,
like
yeah,
instead of like $400 for something, we used a paper clip, like
mm-hmm.
there's
Yeah,
often an easier, cheaper solution. And you wouldn't know that if you just called BMW, right? They'd be like, yep, you got to buy the BMW special tool for $439.99. And what if you went to BMW, to these guys, and said, you know what, I did it with a paper clip. Are you going to tell your customers to do it with a paper clip? They'd probably be like, well, no, I'd get fired.
yeah, probably.
But that's fucked up, isn't it? Like
Well,
I
yeah, and that kind of actually,
I take issue
just
with like getting profit that way. Like if there's a better way to do something that's cheaper and more efficient and stuff,
well,
like yeah, it was great you made all that money, but like now, like especially with medicine, right?
mhm. Well, okay, then let's make this like a two part episode, I guess. Let's segue into something that kind of connects with this. And I was actually this was the idea that I forgot. That so we can have this kind of
Kismet.
yeah double episode basically. That in my opinion, all information should be free. Free is in freedom, not free beer. Um, that's an important distinction.